watch any big-budget war movie or take in a spy thriller, and you could walk away not knowing just how much your movie experience was shaped by the Pentagon or CIA. However, a trove of official documents obtained under U.S. Freedom of Information laws and published this year detail the dealings between filmmakers and intelligence officials at Langley, Virginia, the CIA headquarters.
Probably the best known are Zero Dark 30 and Argo, but they've also assisted the television show Homeland.
How do we deal with homegrown violent jihadists?
They've also assisted Alias.
You work for the very enemy you thought you were fighting.
24.
Tell me where the hell Vice is!
A CBS series called The Agency.
Then he slit his throat.
They assisted a film called The Sum of All Fear, starring Ben Affleck.
Captain Jack Ryan, CIA. Charlie Wilson's War is a really good example where they maintain the idea that, are we really doing the right thing by arming the Mujahideen, the forerunners of the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization in Afghanistan in the 1980s? They kind of question that in a kind of jokey way, like the last caption in the film Charlie Wilson's War is something like, we came, we saw, but then we mucked up the end game, or some joke, It's like, no, that's not what you did actually, and you know it because the original script and the original book that you base this on doesn't say that. You armed terrorists in a really horrific conflict. It's the whole organization behind it, at a systematic level. And that turned Charlie Wilson's War into this saccharine, benign movie.
Throughout the 1990s, the CIA worked with Hollywood very specifically on movies that portrayed the CIA as sort of a heroic force protecting America. Most of the movies were based on Tom Clancy books, actually. So you had A Hunt for Red October and that entire franchise. The lead character, Jack Ryan, is this super heroic figure, and he's constantly, taking down bad guys, saving America, saving the world from various threats, whether it's Islamic terrorism or the IRA or ultimately white supremacists.
Between them, the CIA and the U.S. Department of Defense have had varying levels of input, from simply clarifying points for authenticity to actually writing parts of scripts on more than 1,800 movies and TV shows. When it comes to influencing filmmakers, shaping the story, the Pentagon is usually in a stronger negotiating position than the CIA. Because of the hardware at its disposal, it can shut down a movie before a scene is ever shot.
The Department of Defense is actually a much more powerful player in the entertainment industry for basically financial reasons. The Department of Defense has expensive toys. They have submarines, they have aircraft carriers, they have tanks, and they have the personnel to operate each of those things. So if a filmmaker wants to make a war movie, they often will approach the Department of Defense and basically ask to borrow that equipment. And the Department of Defense will say, maybe, but can I see your script? And they will either say, this is great, we love the way that the military is portrayed in this, we will go ahead and collaborate with you. Or they may say, we hate the way that we're portrayed and refuse to participate.
When the Pentagon does agree to support a film, there can be some scripting strings attached. And the Vietnam War is clearly a sore point. In The Hulk, a reference to a U.S. operation that poisoned Vietnamese farmland was removed. And in the Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, a suggestion that the U.S. did not win the war was cut out. In Iron Man, a reference to soldier suicides was removed, again at the Pentagon's insistence. The CIA's presence in Hollywood is harder to detect. It goes back to the early days of the Cold War and was designed to counter a propaganda effort coming out of the Soviet Union. The CIA placed undercover agents in major studios where they monitored left-wing screenwriters and directors. This was at the height of Cold War paranoia, and Hollywood was under the scrutiny of the U.S. Congress.
Is investigating alleged communist influence and infiltration in the moving picture industry.
The agency started influencing scripts. One senior executive at Paramount Pictures, working covertly for the CIA, described how, to counter what the Soviets were saying about the persecution of African Americans, quote, well-dressed Negroes, unquote, would be planted in certain films.
What happens in the 1990s is that the Cold War ends. And all of a sudden, the CIA is left without a visible, viable enemy to justify its existence. If they were going to continue, they had to do something to improve their public image. And one of the responses to that crisis was to begin to work with Hollywood to convince the American public that, and Congress, that they were still worth being an institution.
In 1996, the CIA's Entertainment Liaison Office in Hollywood began offering free support to movies that featured the agency. Chase Brandon, an intelligence agent and cousin of actor Tommy Lee Jones, was the CIA's first liaison officer. He's credited as a technical advisor on a host of Hollywood blockbusters, such as The Recruit, starring Al Pacino as a veteran CIA officer.
Our failures are known. Our successes are not.
In reality, Brandon was far more than a mere advisor on The Recruit. He helped pitch the film to Disney, that eventually produced and distributed the movie, and was involved in the script writing.
The Recruit.
As another CIA liaison officer put it, Hollywood is the only way the public learns about the agency. Which begs the question, should the public be learning about the CIA from the CIA without even being aware of the agency's role in the production process? These issues became public with the release of one of the biggest CIA Hollywood collaborations to date, Zero Dark 30, a film about the search for Osama bin Laden.
You really believe this story? Osama bin Laden?
The Zero Dark 30 was a really unusual case, I think, for the CIA in terms of how it works with Hollywood. The CIA gave the director and screenwriter a lot of access to the agency. They bounced a lot of ideas back and forth, and they wanted to really kind of tightly control the narrative that this was putting out. It backfired, though, because very quickly after the movie came out, it was criticized for suggesting that torture somehow had played a role in the information gathering that led to the capture and assassination of Osama bin Laden.
Torture and the CIA's use of it, especially after 9/11, were already under investigation when Zero Dark 30 was released. The Senate Intelligence Committee wrote a letter to the production studio, Sony Pictures. They said, "We believe the film is grossly inaccurate and misleading in its suggestion that torture resulted in information that led to the location of Osama bin Laden." Zero Dark 30's director, Catherine Bigelow, eventually had to respond to the allegation that her film was making the CIA's case for torture. In an editorial for the Los Angeles Times, she wrote that critics were, quote, confusing depiction with endorsement. Torture was, as we all know, employed in the early years of the hunt. That doesn't mean it was the key to finding bin Laden. It means it's a part of the story we couldn't ignore.
That's more of a problem with the film industry and the creative industry. Total disinterest in the responsibility of the ideological products that they create. And this is why you can have a very liberal town full of very liberal or even sometimes left-wing celebrities and directors, but actually they create films that are very much in keeping with the American Empire project.
The CIA rarely has any kind of public credit that suggests that they had any hand in shaping the narrative of that film. That lack of transparency I find incredibly problematic because it doesn't allow the viewer to be a smart, critical viewer.
How about this? Why don't they just have at the beginning of each film, made with the support of the Central Intelligence Agency, let's see how long the practice lasts then. Because it won't. Because people will look at it and say, oh, it's one of those propaganda films.